now is the WEF report. Saadia Zahidi is Senior Director of Gender Parity and Human Capital and Constituents at the WEF, and she joins us now. Saadia, I'd just like to talk firstly about what your findings are and how South Africa does in those findings.
Sure. First, just a quick note on what this index is and what it isn't. First, what we're trying to understand is how are countries doing on first developing and then second deploying their human capital. Second, we're trying to understand that by actually breaking this down according to the demographic structure of a country. So what's happening with children, what's happening with youth, what's happening with the core of the labor force, what's happening with the senior-most members, and then what's happening with those that are post-retirement. And then finally, third, it's a relative ranking, and certainly countries can compare themselves to each other, but it's really trying to tell countries how to compare themselves against an ideal. So you can interpret the results as meaning, 100% would be perfection on human capital. And what we find is that even the highest ranking countries are only about 85% of the way there. And then some of the lowest ranking countries are at about 40%. And South Africa has optimized about 60% of its human capital and ends up ranking 92nd on this index, 6th down in sub-Saharan Africa, and 4th from the bottom in about 30 or so countries that are in the upper middle income category.
So what kind of numbers, or rather areas that you've drawn the numbers from, are we talking about here? Give an example that illustrates the case.
Sure. So some of this is looking at just sort of the sheer numbers of people that are making it into education, that are making it into employment. And then second, there are a number of measures that try to look at quality. And what we're seeing is a few pockets of these particular challenges that South Africa is facing. First, about 2/3 of the children that should be in secondary school are still not making it in there. About 1/3 of the children that should be in secondary school are still not making it in there. A second issue is quality. Business leaders who are rating the quality of these schools are consistently putting South Africa at about 115 in the world as compared to other countries on the quality of the schooling. And this is starting to show up in the labor markets, of course. It's been showing up for quite some time. And we see that in the very high rates of youth unemployment. We see that in fairly low levels of labor force participation compared to other countries with similar demographic structures. And then we're seeing that in terms of what's happening in business. Business leaders are consistently saying that they are not finding the high-skilled talent that they need. They're not saying they don't have the jobs, they're saying they're not able to find the talent that they need.
I saw a statistic the other day that South Africa spends four times as much on education per capita as Zambia does, and yet Zambia has outcomes which are twice as good as South Africa's, or twice as effective. The irony here is that we spend an enormous amount of money on education. There's greater access to the system at the bottom, but as you say, a lot of people drop out and the quality is not good. Does your index give any indication of how to fix this?
So what we're trying to do is show where the major gaps are, which then helps hopefully provide better interventions. And part of the work we're doing at the World Economic Forum is something specifically focused on how we can get the right kinds of skills through the Africa Skills Initiative. And what we're proposing is there has to be much more involvement of business in formal education systems, because they need to be involved in determining what is needed for the new curriculum, for the new curricula that are required for the 21st century. And there has to be a completely different set of policies from the government in labor markets that are actually aimed at enabling talent rather than blocking talent. And most of that will really come together through public-private cooperation around the area of education and around the area of jobs, particularly the SME sector.
Thanks to Saadia Zahidi. She's the Senior Director for Gender Parity, Human Capital and Constituents at the WEF. And we saw there on the screen while she was talking, Finland is at the top of the list with 86%. Well, no surprises there from what she's saying, but this is a major ocean liner that takes a long time to turn and a long time to change its destiny.